Hi, I'm Mack, and I'm on a mission to see the hurting get healed and the healed go out and heal others, in order for all of us to experience the true love and light we desire. This podcast is me sharing my journey with you, so you don't feel alone in your journey. Welcome to the Golden Rule Revolution. Hello, everyone. I'm Mack, and welcome back to the Golden Rule Revolution. Thank you for joining me. This is episode 200, which is a big milestone for me, and I'm really excited. I did not do my hair today, put a hat on. First time ever being on camera with a hat on, but doesn't matter. Here we are. Brothers and sisters, I am so honored and grateful to have you join me on this journey. It's such a beautiful time to be together. It's such a beautiful time to share. I've connected with so many of you on Instagram, and we've hopped on Zoom calls and had the honor and privilege to be able to work with many of you in coaching. And I'm just grateful. And so I want to say thank you so much for walking with me in this journey, listening to the content, sharing the show. The audience has grown so much, and it's such a blessing. So I honor you, I bless you, and I love you all. And that said, I am so excited to bring episode 200 to you today. I interviewed Mitzi Perdue. Now, Mitzi is the daughter of one of the Sheraton Hotel founders, and she has grown up in a world that many of us have never even seen or could conceive of, quite frankly. She grew up in an incredible life of privilege, and she also ended up marrying Frank Perdue of Perdue Farms, and she shares lessons that she learned from both her father, her now late husband, and she also shares a mission that she has stepped into to end human trafficking. And this is why I'm so happy that I was able to connect with Mitzi. She started an organization. You'll hear all about it. And what I would say about this, if we do not bring light into the darkness, that which remains in darkness can operate freely. So we must shine light. We must drive darkness out simply by shining light. We don't even have to fight the darkness. When light is present, darkness is not. Darkness is not a counterforce to light. Darkness exists in the absence of light. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, we simply get to be the light this world is looking for, and also direct our light into areas that darkness has ruled for far too long. There are so many hurting and broken people out there on this planet. And you're going to hear the statistics from Mitzi that perhaps are waiting for you to shine the light on it, to stand for liberty and justice for all, regardless of the political structures, even the legal side of where we find the world in right now. You and I have the authority to stand for liberty and justice for all. And so I'm thanking you. I'm honored that you joined. Thank you, Mitzi, for coming on. And everyone, enjoy. Well, I'm so happy to have Mitzi Perdue on the podcast. And this is our second time talking since we had the pleasure of recording an episode on the Awakened Soul last week. And so, Mitzi, how are you? It's good to see you.
Oh, I'm just as happy as a person can be to be back. Thank you so much for having me twice. Yay.
Yes, it's such an honor. It's such an honor. Really excited to, have you share some of the stories you shared the other day, but also talk about the nonprofit, talk about what you're doing, and also some of the lessons that your dad learned in business in his sleep or in his dreams, which is beautiful, and the messages he got. So I'm excited to get into all this. So for those who are just hearing your name or seeing you, meeting you, share your story, where you grew up and the life that you lived growing up.
Okay, I'm wondering how serious to be. Like, I could say, "Oh gosh, guys, I'm wonderful," but maybe we ought to be serious.
A little.
No, seriously. I grew up in Boston, and my background was that my late father was the co-founder, along with his brother and his roommate from college of the Sheraton Hotel Chain, which meant that, boy, did I ever have a nice childhood. And one of the things that I consider myself supremely lucky for is that I think both my parents put an amazing amount of effort into raising their children. They didn't just leave it to chance.
That's beautiful.
And
Well,
the reason that I think that's so important is I grew up with a lot of wealthy families, a lot of wealthy children, and the number of ways people can screw up their lives, whether they're rich or poor, is infinite. So I think that every parent ought to put just enormous effort into figuring out what were the values that will help somebody have a happy life.
Yeah. Did you grow up with, this is one of the questions I forgot to ask you the other day, because I ask all the guests, did you grow up with a religious framework or worldview in your family?
Yeah, well, it's kind of mixed. My mother was devout. My father would accompany the family to church services every single Sunday, but he was not devout. But on the other hand, he believed in the message of religion and the values of religion. So I think that he was a religious person. How about without buying into a particular religion?
Well, I appreciate that. And I totally understand that. So would you say that you had that context of the spiritual, there was the spiritual realm, that there was something more than this physical world that you grew up with?
Yeah, and I believe I got that from both sides. I mean, but both sides, being mother and father, both of them were absolutely deep believers in that we're here to give back. And that, one of the thoughts that I grew up with was that success is measured not by what you can get, but by what you can give, and that the purpose of life is service. And tell me if this isn't a spiritual point of view. I remember once when I was really quite young, I might have been 10 or 12, walking into my father's office. It was on a Saturday, and he had an office in our home. And there he is, surrounded by books and just deep into whatever he's doing. And I'm a little girl, and I interrupt him. "What are you doing, Daddy?" And he explained that he was giving money away, that he was researching people. Since he was an extremely wealthy man, people regularly asked for money, or more important, organizations, charities would ask for money. And he was figuring out, I guess, the most worthy. And so I asked him, "Why are you doing that?" And he told me, "The greatest pleasure my money ever gave me was in giving it away." Now, isn't that spiritual rather than material?
Certainly. And definitely aligns to the concept of currency, like water. And if you allow water to go, the more water can flow through. But if you dam that up, it starts to overflow and cause mess. So yeah, this incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, and then my mother, just from the youngest age, I remember her telling that what was really important in life was, and I'm going to use her exact phrase, but I'm not sure if it makes sense to people outside the family. I will put it to you. Does this make sense? Is this comprehensible? She told me, and I bet I was 2 or 3 when I heard this the first time, that your job is to put back in the bucket. Does that make sense? I'll translate further.
Well, we have a book that my oldest, someone bought it for her and said, "Fill the bucket." And it's always, I think it's around the same concept of every day we're either putting into the bucket or taking out of someone's bucket.
Yeah, so it is the same. I mean, the way I interpret put back in the bucket is you're getting a lot of stuff, but give back.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say getting a lot of stuff, they were actually, I was a child in the 1940s and teen years in the 1950s. They were actually quite, I think by today's standard would almost say stingy, because gifts in general came at birthday or Christmas, and you didn't get 100 gifts. You might get 4 or 5. And I think they'd be kind of horrified at how kind of free spending we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I also remember the first time. Well, I grew up during the war years, but even up until the early 1950s, I think times were tough for Americans. I mean, they're certainly not as tough as they were in other countries, but it was a time when the overhanging debt was enormous, and it's just the whole 40s. I think were fairly difficult times in this country as well as everywhere else, including that my brother was in the Navy, and I have a somewhat unique view. I hope I don't lose friends as I tell this story, but I've got I think it's not a unique view. I have a personal view of dropping the bomb.
Mm.
And this is such a delicate subject, but here's what it meant to me. My brother, as a Navy guy, was steaming towards, I think it was Okinawa.
Mm.
And it was known that something like 300,000 Americans would die, and probably a bigger number of Japanese if there was a ground fight in Japan.
Mm.
And so there is my brother steaming towards what looked like a very likely death.
Mm.
And then suddenly the war's over. So
Yeah.
now, from my point of view, I'm glad that it came to a sudden end.
I have a story along the atomic bomb as well. I was in Nagasaki. I was filming a TV show. I was the host of this show a few years ago, and we go to Nagasaki, and there's the statue. Anyone listening, you should look this up. I forget how big the statue is, but it might be 18 feet from head to toe, and it's the statue sitting in this lotus position, and we're the only white people there. We're in Japan. Everyone's Japanese, and these school children were there. And it's a solemn, you feel the solemnness of it. And these beautiful, beautiful little children were playing on their flutes or recorders or something. They're playing Amazing Grace. And
Oh my
I started
goodness.
crying. It was so, it's one of those moments I will never forget. And I said while I was recording, they were filming, I said, out of the darkest dark can come forth the most brilliant light. I'm like, we are on this ground that got decimated, but here these beautiful children are playing Amazing Grace, treating us like friends, not like foe. And I said, this was the beauty of humanity, that we can unite in this love for one another. And so the bomb certainly is, in some respects, devastating, in other respects unifying and humbling for some. And yeah, that's why when we talked about, I always ask people religion, just because I think it's fascinating where people come from and then where they are today. But I like what you said, your dad, took the principles, but never jumped in necessarily one camp, because I think when we can stay in that center space, it allows us to relate to everyone, to anyone, to bring them close. And yeah.
In fact, that's, if I could wave a magic wand and do something wonderful for America, I'd have us unite over. I mean, there's a lot that we can unite over.
Yeah.
And like one of the things, we can unite over the environment, and we can unite over being against human trafficking, which is my cause. Actually, I'm heavily involved in both causes, but human trafficking more.
And let's get into that, because can you tell people, this is good, what WTF stands for in your world?
All right, then let me share a story with you about how we got the name. Originally, my efforts at anti-trafficking were going to be to get ultra-high net worth people to donate objects for an auction with the immodest goal of raising $100 million. But that's not impossible, because we got some pretty amazing donations.
Wow.
Well, the organization was going to be called the Anti-Trafficking Auction. And people, by the way, this may still happen, but it's been put off because of COVID-19. But the idea is people give $1 million items for an auction, and then they say where the money goes. That's on hold until COVID-19's in the rearview mirror. However, I take out the name on, I got a website, the antitraffickingauction.com, and then, and I'm getting volunteers, probably 100 at this point. And one guy who's a volunteer, his name's Terry Wu, he called me up and he explained to me, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not just a neuroscientist, I'm a neuroscience marketer, which means that when he advises people on marketing, he takes into account how our brains work. And he said, Mitzi, the name you chose sucks. And I'm grateful as a person can be, because he convinced me that he was totally right. He said, the problem is it's not memorable. There's no call to action. It doesn't roll off the tongue. So it really does suck. He said, instead, he told me he had spent the afternoon, or maybe it was the morning, looking for names that would meet his criteria of what makes for a good name. And he discovered on register.com that this wonderful name, winthisfight.org, was available. And so the name of my organization is Win This Fight, and the subtitle is Stop Human Trafficking Now. But he explained to me why Win This Fight is a good name. There's a call to action. It's easy to say. And guess what? If you think of its initials, WTF, it's memorable.
Yeah.
But he told me something else, which I'm eager to share with everybody. A really good name has or a good slogan has a little bit of wrongness to it. Maybe the grammar's not right. Maybe it's a funny spelling, but something that makes it stick in your mind because it's not quite right. And he said, Mitzi, he said, you come across as, somewhat ladylike, and to have you have an organization, the initials of which are WTF, that this is sort of discordant. And he said, that makes it memorable. And I shared the idea for the name with my board of directors and others, and they said, that name's beyond genius. Win This Fight's good, but WTF is even better.
That's right. That's right. So everyone listening, now you have a new definition of what that acronym stands for. And it's such an important, it's, as someone, I was abused severely growing up, and as someone who's gone through the horrors of significant abuse, to know what these kids, women and children are going through without a voice to speak for them and to yell for them and to fight for them, it's devastating to the soul of humanity. So I'm so thankful that you're doing what you're doing to bring awareness. And like I said to you the other day, hopefully someday it's won that fight instead of win this fight.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
But WTF, it may be discordant for it coming out of my mouth, but guess what? It's so appropriate. I mean, I really feel WTF, that here in today's world, that there's still slavery going on, and that there's 40 million people who are enslaved. It's just, it shouldn't be.
It brings up so many issues. I was a journalist for a long time. I've met many friends in the highest seats in the national media, and it's frustrating for them and for myself, knowing that there's just a certain narrative that is allowed to be broadcasted as quote unquote news. And then there is the omission of narratives that would radically shift this entire country and world's perspective if it was brought through the forefront of mainstream media. And we talked about this the other day. If people want to look away from these horrific, I think the first time you saw it, you said you wanted to look away, but then if we keep looking away, it allows this to continue.
Yeah, I got involved in this 2 years ago. I mean, I've got to just put it out there that I'm new at this. There are people who've been working on it for 20, 30, 40 years, but you have to start somewhere. So I just plunge ahead. But 2 years ago, human trafficking was the third source of income for organized crime. It's grown so fast that it's now the second largest source of income for organized crime. And I'm going to bet people are curious, well, what are the others?
Yeah.
All right, number 3 is illegal weapons. Number 2 is human trafficking. And number 1 is drugs. But, this is kind of horrifying, but human trafficking is just growing and growing and growing. And I've heard people say that they'd rather deal humans than drugs, because a human, it's awful, almost too awful to say, but I'm repeating what people have told me, that supposing you're trafficking a woman, or maybe you're trafficking 4 women, you can use them over and over again, probably until they die. Yeah. On the other hand, with drugs, you have to keep getting more. Right. So, unless we do something to stop it, it keeps growing. And I have a pretty strong opinion of why it keeps growing.
Yeah, why?
And that, by the way, is also related to what I think can put a real dent in the problem. Human trafficking, in my opinion, grows and grows and grows because the profits are just extraordinary. I mentioned $150 billion. But to bring it down to something more comprehensible than $150 billion, I mean, I don't know what $150 billion really means, but to bring it down to a level that's easier to understand, a trafficker who is exploiting or running 4 girls in Manhattan in the course of a year can pretty easily have an income of $1 million a year, tax-free.
Wow. Okay,
so when you have those kinds of profits, the temptation's enormous. But another part of the equation is, enormous profits, but almost no deterrence. The trafficker, and I've gotten this information from multiple sources, and how about it's a global statistic? If you're a trafficker, your odds of doing jail time or even paying a serious penalty are less than 1 in 100. I mean, isn't that amazing? You can commit one of the most horrible atrocities in the world, which is enslave another person, and you're not going to pay a price for it.
Why do you think it is?
Okay, I'll give you the reason why.
Yeah.
Because they're extraordinarily adept at keeping their victims from testifying. They, whether it's, torture, death, threatening their relatives, one way or another, it's incredibly hard to get people to testify. They are unwilling witnesses. Yeah. We have an answer for that. But let me finish the evil equation of huge profits, obscene profits, and no deterrence equals ever expanding trafficking, more and more trafficking. So we have to stop either the huge profits or the no deterrence, or even better, if you could go after both, and there's a way.
How is that?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, because we're talking about one of the darkest subjects on the face of the earth. Yeah. But I'm into being upbeat and hopeful because I'm going to describe something that's fairly new. And let me go back, 3 or 4 generations to Al Capone, the famous crime boss. That man was responsible for dozens and dozens, possibly even hundreds of murders. People lost their lives because this man existed. And yet they were never able to put him in jail for the murders that he committed. But what they were finally able to get him on was tax evasion, a financial crime. Well, Heiress, which is an organization I admire to the outer limits, I think it's got to be one of the most prestigious, most effective anti-trafficking organizations in the United States. It has just started a financial crimes unit, but I don't think it's funded on nearly the scale that it should be. I mean, I want hundreds of people going after financial crimes. And as far as I can tell, they've got two like financial experts, and the others, again, I mean, I may be wrong on this, but it looks of the four people who are working on it, two have some kind of administrative role. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, they'd get the funding to have 100 people go after it, financial crimes. And allow me to explain how going after financial crimes works with trafficking.
Yeah, please.
All right, supposing that you're the head of a, I don't know, a police department in some medium-sized, small-sized town, and you absolutely know that there's trafficking going on. You know, you get all these tips, and you know, you've got ways of finding out what's going on in the community. But you also know that you can't get any of the victims to testify. You know, they're afraid for their lives.
Yep.
And, you know, as an example of being afraid for your life, I had an NYPD, New York Police Department person tell me that he visited a woman in the hospital who had had her face gashed with a broken beer bottle from like eye to chin, 32 stitches, and she still wouldn't testify against her abuser because she was so afraid of him.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to being the head of a police department. You know that there's trafficking going on. You're absolutely certain that you can't get the victims to testify. They are too afraid. And if they're not afraid for themselves, they're afraid for their families.
Yep.
So what do? Up to now, it's a real problem. But what Polaris can do is they can working with the police department, working with law enforcement, they can get all the information that law enforcement has, and they probably have a lot. And then they can put it together with the financial crimes unit, which has the ability to like go out in the dark web, track money movements, use artificial intelligence, just use a whole array of tools that are not available to a typical police department. And they're not available to the typical police department because the people with this kind of expertise, you know, it may cost $250,000 per person.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's just not in the cards for most police departments to hire the experts that Polaris can handle.
Right.
Well, you put Polaris's knowledge of financial crimes together with the on-the-ground knowledge that the police department has, and you don't have to worry about reluctant witnesses because, as Sarah Crow from Polaris says, if you've got bank records and other like written records, or maybe they're available on the dark web, but you can show where the money came from and where it's going, and you can prove that it was illegally obtained because you know where it came from, you've got a pretty good chance of putting that perpetrator in jail.
Speaking of the perpetrators, I mean, it's not the impoverished people that are buying other human beings. You have to have some sort of financial means to commit this heinous crime. So what is the demographic of someone purchasing another human being? That I think people need to know or be aware, or how do we start putting this puzzle piece together of what it looks like?
My impression is and I've done articles on probably 100 different anti-trafficking organizations, so I'm going to tell you what my best impression is. And that is that, boy, you don't have to have a high income to have a sex drive. And maybe you have a way of getting it for $50 or $60. So how about if you have a source of income, you're probably in the demographic. I mean, you can be very rich, you can be middle class, or you can't be destitute, but you can have a pretty low income and still do this.
At some degree, maybe not owning, but maybe using the person.
Oh wait, are we talking about the Johns who?
Yeah, I'm just like who
are buying sex,
or the actual human themselves? Like, or yeah, explain. Yeah, a lot of Johns, so it's mostly men. But then there's like Ghislaine Maxwell, who's on trial right now, and I'm reading all that. It's like it's horrific. It's horrific.
There's a huge proportion of traffickers, or at least in my mind, it's huge because I would have expected almost none. But there's a large proportion of traffickers that are female, and maybe they're running a massage parlor. There's in the range of 10,000 illegal massage businesses, and a fair proportion of them are run by women. And this. The problem with illegal massage parlors is that they can kind of pose as being illegal. And one of the things that's kind of jarring is, in the past, if you were selling sex out of the building, you were probably in some kind of red light district. Now you're right out in the middle of town because you're sort of posing as a legal massage parlor. But if you, and let me be so clear about this. There are lots of legal massage parlors.
Yeah.
Ones that don't, where for the right price, you're not going to get a happy ending.
Yeah, right.
But since it's a little bit ambiguous, the illegal ones can kind of move in and pretend to be legal. But a person I respect told me that the illegal massage parlor business is $2.8 billion in this country. That's a heck of a lot of money. And he said, I can't know that he's right, but I can swear that he told me this, that 2 billion of it goes to China. And we got to talking about it, and he was saying that, there are cartels that run this, and that in some ways it resembles the mafia. But then he said, the mafia is kind of old hat. They're not as powerful and strong as the people who are running massage parlors. I mean, frequently they'll have possibly a woman in the massage parlor, and we're only talking the illegal ones. It's a shame that there's this ambiguity between the legal ones and the illegal ones. Yeah. But in the illegal ones, say it's run by a woman, and maybe it even appears in the paperwork that she's the owner. She's not. She is part of a cartel that might have dozens of massage parlors. And one of the things that they can do, since it's a cartel, is supposing there's a girl who's been working. Let's say that she's been lured into this country from, let's say, China, or possibly Korea or Thailand, an Asian country. She's been lured to this country with the promise of a great job in the hospitality industry. And she's expecting to work in a hotel or a restaurant. She arrives in this country, they take her passport, they have her absolutely terrified of the law. And if she doesn't provide the happy endings that they want her to do, she's going to be beaten or starved or tortured. And $2 billion, according to my friend, is going right back to China illegally.
It's something I've always been fascinated with. And the Bible talks about put on the whole armor of God. And it says, you have, in the King James Version, it says, have your loins girt about with truth. So truth covers our sexual reproduction areas. And I was always curious, like, why the belt of truth? Like, why not the helmet of truth, but the belt of truth around our sex organs? And I think it's based on, when we walk in truth, it keeps us from the deviance of this compulsion and this energy to go down paths that were never intended to go down in the very beginning. So truth protects us sexually, or the absence of truth leaves us hurting in that area.
I wish there were an easy answer, but it just grieves me how much God is being kicked out of the public sphere.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've seen it. We don't have to guess that the more the more God's out of the picture, the more cruel we are to each other.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get back to we'll talk about the website, but in our remaining time, I would love to just hear, not just hear, but I would love to hear some lessons that you learned from your father in business. Because everyone listening, Mitzi, we're talking about this nonprofit, which is so important, but you are a successful business executive on your own right, on your own, in your own 2 feet in this world. And yet you inherited a lot of wisdom, and you came from a lot of wisdom in business. You're the Perdue family, you built business together. However, I want to hear what your dad learned in these dreams. This is something, or I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I would love to hear, like, where did your dad get his business acumen, or how did he start to hear these beautiful
Well,
truths?
it's almost mysterious because, as a child, it was just clear as could be to me that, that I came from a family that was doing really well. At his death, the family owned 400 hotels. And wherever we went, we were staying in the presidential suites. In fact, I could make a guess that, there are some people who've stayed in more presidential suites than I have, but not a huge number.
Wow.
So, it's clear to me that father was really a success. And so I was forever asking him, where did the ideas come from? There's a phrase in baseball that nobody bats 1,000. And yet it almost felt as if he was batting 1,000. He'd make a decision and it would work. And so I asked him, and he told me, he said that he hoped that the Wall Street analysts didn't hear his answer, but he said, in the course of building the Sheraton Hotel Chain from no hotels to 400, he said there were between half a dozen and a dozen times where he would be faced with a decision where he knew that if he made the right decision, the company would flourish. If he made the wrong decision, the company could go bankrupt. And by the way, he had on his shoulders an amount of pressure that I don't think I could endure for 5 minutes. Because, if I make a mistake, maybe a few people are affected. If he made a mistake, 20,000 people could lose their jobs. And can you even imagine how heavy that is? Knowing that somebody might not be able to put their kid through college, or might not have a decent retirement, it's pressure that I don't even understand.
Yeah. I had 10 full-time employees in my business, and that was enough. I can't even imagine, getting to that tens of thousands. That's just,
it's huge, 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 huge.
Wow.
All right. So he told me he'd go to bed at night, very aware of the seriousness of what he had to decide. But he also told me he'd go to bed having no idea which way to go. None. And, as aware as a human being can be that this would be a decision that would be just extraordinarily consequential for a great many people. I don't know how he slept even. I couldn't. Nevertheless, he did. I think he was known to be a good sleeper. He told me he'd wake up in the morning with perfect clarity of what to do. And I said, well, how'd that happen? And he said, and I don't know if he meant this literally or if he was being metaphorical. I wish he were alive today and I could ask, but he said, I talked with ancestors, and they gave me the answer. And and again, was he being like poetic, or did he literally mean I talked with the ancestors and they gave me the answer? I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? What's your guess?
I'd like to think that he actually did talk to the ancestors, that in our dreams, in Judaism, our very first prayer is, we thank God for returning our soul within us with compassion and loving kindness, for great is his faithfulness. Because our soul, we're never as close to death as when we sleep. So where are we when we're sleeping? Where is our soul? What is actually happening that the human body can just conk out without fear? And go somewhere. And I love to think that, yeah, your father was in communication with the wisdom of the elder council or the ancestral line. I think that's beautiful. So I love, for me, no problem believing that that is a literal story.
Well, if you told me, Mitzi, you got a bet, did he mean it literally or was he being poetic? I can't know, but I'd sure bet that he was literally meaning it because, the proof is in the pudding. The decisions turned out to be right.
Yeah.
And since nobody you can't toss a fair coin and get like heads 10 times in a row. And yet he did. I mean, he defied the odds.
That's beautiful. It's well, first of all, we have not because we ask not. That's a verse in the Bible. We have not because we ask not.
Oh, that's so important.
Yes. And really, how we got connected with Mark and Crystal Hanson, their new book, Ask. I mean, it's such a simple premise. We have not because I think it takes humility. What I'm struck by, and I didn't know your father, and I do know the hotel world because I worked when I had my ad agency. We predominantly worked in the hotel industry around the country, and the ownership groups and the actual flagships and all the brands and all the different things. So I'd imagine that your father was in the room with very powerful people having very important discussions, but it takes a sense of humility to ask, and even to ask the ancestors, and even to share with his own daughter, I think, as a father. So your father must have had a beautiful humility to him.
Actually, I think both Frank Perdue and father did. I have a friend whose specialty is body language. And he had a comment about Frank Perdue, that when Frank Perdue would enter a room, he was somebody whose name appeared on the checks of 20,000 employees. Yeah. So, this is a big person. There are lots of companies that are bigger, but 20,000 is pretty big.
Yeah.
I think it's like one of the largest employers in Maryland. So this guy is an alpha male. He's somebody who built it himself. And, he could have walked into a room, taking up lots of space, chest out, shoulders back, just taking up space, which is, kind of what you'd expect.
Yeah.
But my body language expert friend said, no, he was extremely good at not taking up all the oxygen. He would be, kind of not taking up space and almost humble, and he'd ask people their opinions.
Wow.
And his attitude, which he told me, was none of us is as smart as all of us. And there's a lot of wisdom in this room. And my job is to tap into it.
I love that. I always use the Bible. There's a verse, in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And I think that if we see everyone as a counselor, no matter their perspective in life, but we have the humility to ask and say, what do you think? First of all, it feels good to be asked our opinion, so people feel good and entrusted, but also to take that and chew on it. And it's beautiful. It really is.
Well, something else that I'd observe, because I'm a writer by trade. And so I have some training in being observant, or at least trying my darn best to be observant. And among the things that I noticed about Frank, we were married for 17 years before his passing. And I felt, or I observed, that in almost every interaction, he might ask a question, but otherwise 90% of the time he's listening. And that could be, whether he's talking with a cab driver, or maybe he's calling on somebody and there's a secretary or a receptionist. Ask questions and then listen. Or if he was in, let's say, a sales meeting, one of the things that he was pretty careful to do with, say there's a sales meeting, or in any kind of business meeting of, say, his employees, he would take great care to make sure that they didn't know the answer that he wanted, because he was perfectly aware that if they knew ahead of time what he wanted, that they were going to twist into a pretzel and give him the answer that he wanted. And so he'd take great care not to have people know what he favored, because he said that way you get the best chance of getting the freshest ideas.
See, if I if I wasn't talking to you and I talked about Frank, I'm like, Frank sounds like a cool guy.
Oh, the coolest guy in the whole
Yeah.
world. No,
Yeah.
I mean, he was my hero from beginning to end, and I put a certain amount of effort into having him not know that, but he was.
Wow. That is so beautiful. You you have you're really you're a cool person, Mitzi. It's fascinating your journey on this earth and the family. I really believe in soul contracts. And so in your soul saw the family that you would jump into, and then eventually the family you would create with Frank and the life. And it's
Well,
really
to me, one of the great mysteries of life, which makes me more open to, how about the certainty that there are forces that we just can't even begin to get, but they're there, which is when Frank and I met, we decided to marry right off.
that's right. Tell this story real quick. This is such a great story.
Well, I lived in California. I had a television show, but I was also growing rice,
Hmm.
as in, the grain that you eat with chopsticks if you're
Yeah.
Chinese.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm growing rice in California, but there was a party in New York that I attended. I'm trying to say Washington, D.C. There was a party in Washington, D.C. that I attended,
Hmm.
and I had to leave early. Frank Perdue arrived late. We only overlapped by 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And the first 5 minutes were spent talking. We both knew each other was divorced. And we were talking about how we'd never remarry again, how it was an institution designed to make people miserable. And all right, that's the first 5 minutes. But we were just totally agreeing on this. But then somewhere around 5 minutes into it, we started discussing that was unfortunate because it meant growing old alone, but that was our fate because we'd never trust anybody again.
Hmm.
And then he looked down at me and he said, I believe I could trust you. And I looked up at him and I said, I believe I could trust you.
Wow.
And the next 5 minutes were spent talking about what our marriage would be like. It would be supportive and not competitive, and would be there for the good and the bad. And so it was for the next 17 years.
That is so beautiful.
And when we married, we had known each other in person 6 weeks and 3 days. And
It's so great.
but to me, the mystery is, I was 48 at the time. He was 68.
Hmm.
We both came from, I'm trying to think how to put delicately the fact that we were both filthy, stinking rich.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, people who have that background normally are extremely self-protective and
Yep.
and how about paranoid?
Yeah. Certainly. Certainly.
And how we could both make a commitment immediately. It does not make sense. I mean, he was old enough to know better. I was old enough to know better. We went and did it.
Wow.
And it was so the right decision because, I mean, I love the Perdue family beyond imagination. I think a day doesn't go by when I don't talk with one of my Perdue relatives.
Wow.
Like, I'm really proud that I was talking with my stepson who runs the company for half an hour today.
Wow.
I have a stepdaughter that, there were some things going on in her life that I respect and admire, but she wanted to talk about them 3 times yesterday. I'm just honored that she wants to.
Wow. I forgot that I know you go, is Mitzi your birth name? Because it's such a
No, my real name's Mary.
Mary. I love the name Mitzi. Was that a nickname you were given as a girl, young girl?
Well, here's what happened. My brothers and my uncles all married Marys, and my mother's name was Mary. So
wow.
my father, if my father could call Mary, and like 6 women come running, so we all got nicknames.
That's awesome. Well, I love that nickname, Mitzi.
Oh, I love it too. Thanks, Daddy.
Yeah, it's a great name. And for everyone listening, you reminded me of a really beautiful saying that I've tried to implement in my own marriage, that I'm not looking for the star. I'm looking for a co-star. And it sounds like you and Frank were co-stars together. And that that is something I've implemented in my marriage because my wife and I both were in TV. We're both had our careers. We both had that persona, and we chose to be co-stars in this reality. And it sounds like that's the way to go. If you and Frank had such a good experience. And so,
Well, I do have a theory that it's kind of important for both to bring an equal amount to the table, but one might do it by being brilliant, another might do it by being hospitable. I mean, there are different things you can bring to the table.
yeah, exactly. That's really
So I felt, well, I'm not sure that I felt exactly an equal, but I did feel that I brought things to the table that he badly wanted. Like, how about warmth and affection and just totally being on his side? And
yeah, a co-star. It's beautiful. It really is. It's so beautiful. Mitzi, I am so thankful you came on. And is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to cover?
yes,
Yeah, okay, go.
yeah, but I need people to have a pencil and paper handy, or an iPhone handy, or a smartphone, because if they care about human trafficking, it would be absolutely wonderful if they would text WIN, as in win, to 55312. And let me tell you what happens if you do. Several nice things. One, you get a free ticket to an hour-long conference on May 11th, which it's put on by the Fulbright Association. I get to moderate it. And it will explain some wonderful new approaches to attacking human trafficking. And it will be just full of hope and uplift and something that you can do. Okay, that's one thing that you get by typing WIN to 55312. The other thing, which I'd love you to do, I guess I'm addressing your audience now, not you.
Yeah, absolutely. But include me in this, absolutely.
Okay, you generic. If you type 55312, if you type WIN to 55312, you'll also come to my website. And there are a couple of things that might interest you. One is I write a weekly blog, and it's one that, the feedback I get on it is that it's very uplifting. It's full of hope. It tells dire stories and then good things that happen because of it. I mean, people tell me that they walk away from one of my blogs feeling good. Wow. All right, we like that. Yeah. Another possibility is if you're moved by this and you really want to do something, contact me, and you can get to me by going to 55312, texting WIN to 55312. If you arrive at my website, there's a place to contact me, and I'll answer any emails or letters. And if you'd like to volunteer, please let me know, because I'll find something for you to do that will match your interests and skills. And I think I can promise you, other people have told me that this is so, that you'll have the ride of your life. You'll do exciting work that's consequential, that will change lives. And at the end of your days, you can look back and say, I did something really important to make the world a better place. Beautiful. So come join us.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I will put that in the show notes as well. So everyone listening, I'll put all that information in the show notes. And Mitzi, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming on for the second time, first time on this show. And you're just a brilliant soul. And I'm honored to be able to share this time with you. So thank you.
Well, I would adore to come back, and I adore spending time with you. And I love the premise of what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Mitzi, again, thank you so much. And everyone listening, thank you for joining me on this journey. I bless you. I love you. I honor you. Keep shining your light, brothers and sisters. Keep doing the work. Keep standing, like I said in the beginning, in the intro of this video, for liberty and justice for all. Be the change that you want to see. Don't turn an eye away from that which you deem as ugly or too dark, because someone is living in that in this very moment. And they are needing us to find the courage, the strength, and our own internal power to look at it, shine light on it, and not only liberate them, but also liberate ourselves. So I bless you all. I am Lucas Mack. This is the Golden Rule Revolution, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening. For support in your journey, go to my website, lucasmack.com.